Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the future of education.
Ooh,
Specifically, how education might change in a world where AI is becoming, increasingly sophisticated and intertwined with our lives.
right.
And you've given us a really interesting mix of materials for this deep dive. Academic excerpts about AI and education articles looking back at how tech has or hasn't worked in classrooms in the past, and even some sci-fi that imagines what learning could look like in the future.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating mix.
It is. So we're not just going to be talking about cool new gadgets like VR classrooms or AI tutors. We're going to explore why these things matter for you as a learner, and maybe uncover some surprising parallels to the past along the way.
I think we will.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm curious what makes you think this time is different. We've seen tech fads come and go in education before. Why is AI so potentially transformative?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of people are asking. I think what's really interesting here is that we seem to be at an inflection point, similar to when the printing press, the personal computer, or the internet first emerged. These technologies didn't just add something new to education, they completely changed how we learn, work, and even think. And AI has the potential to be just as disruptive.
Okay, I'm intrigued. One of the book excerpts you shared talks about something called inevitable technology, the idea that some technologies become so essential, so deeply woven into our lives that we can't imagine functioning without them. Like, I can't imagine life without my smartphone now, even though they were pretty clunky and expensive when they first came out.
Right.
The authors give examples like buildings, money, electricity, things we take for granted now, but which were once brand new and even met with resistance. But how do they explain how technology becomes inevitable? Is it just a matter of time?
Well, it's not just about time. It's about the technology becoming so useful, so convenient, and so integrated into our daily routines that the benefits outweigh any initial resistance. Think about the smartphone example. It started as a luxury item, but as the technology improved, smaller size, better battery life, more apps, and the price came down, it became accessible to more people. Then as more people used it, it became more useful. We developed an entire ecosystem around it.
So it's like a snowball effect. The more people use it, the more integrated it becomes, the harder it is to opt out. And they're suggesting AI specifically in the form of something called the Omni Assistant could be heading in that direction.
Exactly. The Omni Assistant is this idea of merging several existing technologies, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and personalized digital assistants into a single seamlessly integrated experience. Imagine a device, maybe like a pair of glasses or even a contact lens, that's constantly with you, learning about your preferences, your learning style, even anticipating your needs.
Okay, so we're not just talking about a smarter Siri or Alexa here. We're talking about a personalized AI companion that's constantly learning and adapting to you. I have to admit that sounds a bit like science fiction. Experts really think this could be widespread in the next 10, 20 years.
Well, predicting exact timelines is tricky. Remember trying to explain what smartphones would be like before the iPhone came along. No one could have predicted how rapidly things would change. But the key point is that the building blocks for the Omni Assistant are already here. The technology is advancing at an incredible pace.
Okay, so you're saying it's not a matter of if this technology will arrive, but when. But, flipping through all these articles you sent, I'm struck by how many times we've been down this road before. There's this whole stack of articles about attempts to integrate technology into classrooms that just flopped. I mean, we're talking Thomas Edison championing films in schools in the 1920s, the educational TV craze in the 50s, even those clunky computer labs in the 80s and 90s. So much hype, so little lasting impact. What makes you so confident that the Omni Assistant won't just become another expensive footnote in the history of education?
That's a great question. And it's true, the history of technology and education is littered with good intentions and disappointing outcomes. But I think there are a few key reasons why this time could be different. First, and this goes back to your point about the snowball effect, the Omni Assistant isn't just a classroom tool. It's envisioned to be woven into every aspect of our lives. Think about it as the technology matures. It won't just be used in schools. It could be used in the workplace, in healthcare and entertainment. And as it becomes more integrated into our daily lives, it'll be harder for the education system to resist its influence.
So the pressure for change isn't just coming from inside the system this time. It's coming from the outside world as the technology becomes more ubiquitous. It's almost like the education system will have to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant. That actually leads us nicely into the next part of our discussion. You sent over some sci-fi excerpts that paint some vivid pictures of what life with an Omni Assistant could actually look like. There's one scenario that really stuck with me. It describes a teenager learning about King David in history class. But instead of just reading a textbook, they're fully immersed in a virtual reality environment. They're learning to use a sling, interacting with virtual characters, even having a conversation with a virtual King David. It's incredible, but what struck you about these sci-fi visions of the future?
What I find most fascinating about that scenario is the potential for intrinsic motivation. It moves away from learning being about grades and tests and towards pursuing knowledge because it's genuinely interesting and personally meaningful. If you're fully immersed in a historical period, experiencing it firsthand, the learning itself becomes the reward. Imagine a student who struggles to sit still in a traditional classroom, but comes alive when they're able to explore a subject in a virtual world. That's the kind of transformation that the Omni Assistant could make possible.
That makes a lot of sense, but if we're talking about a future where learning is driven by curiosity and personal meaning, it makes me wonder about the role of traditional assessment. I mean, if you have an Omni Assistant constantly tracking your progress, providing feedback, and adjusting the learning experience to your needs, will we even need tests in the future?
That's a question many experts are grappling with. And some believe that yes, this could lead to a world of more personalized feedback and mentorship, where the focus shifts to developing skills that AI can't easily replicate, things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, and collaboration.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting. We're talking about a potential paradigm shift, not just in how we learn, but in what we value in education. But before we get carried away with all the exciting possibilities, I think it's important to acknowledge the elephant in the room. I mean, all this sounds amazing, but it also raises some serious questions about privacy, data security, and the potential for bias in these systems. How do we ensure that the Omni Assistant is used responsibly and ethically? And what steps can we take to address these concerns?
You're absolutely right. We can't just blindly embrace this technology without considering the potential downsides. And that's a conversation for our next segment, so stay tuned.
We were just talking about some of the potential downsides of the Omni Assistant, specifically around privacy and data security. I think this is something a lot of people are worried about if we're talking about a device that's constantly with you, learning about your habits, your preferences, even your emotions. That data could be incredibly valuable and potentially misused. So how do we address these concerns? Are there any safeguards in place to prevent the Omni Assistant from becoming a tool for surveillance or manipulation?
Yeah, it's a valid concern and one that policymakers and tech developers are starting to grapple with. There are a few key areas where we need to be vigilant. First, data ownership and transparency. We need to be clear about who owns the data that the Omni Assistant collects, how it's being used, and who has access to it. Imagine a scenario where your Omni Assistant notices you're struggling with a particular math concept. It could share that information with your teacher, who can then provide extra support. But what if that information is also shared with third-party companies who want to target you with educational products or services? That's where things get murky.
So it's not just about protecting the data from malicious actors, it's about setting clear boundaries around how that data can be used, even for seemingly beneficial purposes.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about it that way. You know, another big concern I keep hearing is about the potential for bias in AI systems. We know that algorithms can reflect the biases of their creators, and if the Omni Assistant is going to be shaping how students learn and what they learn, we need to be really careful about the kind of information it's providing.
Absolutely. Bias in AI is a huge issue, and it's something we need to be actively addressing as we develop these technologies. One approach is to ensure that the data sets used to train AI algorithms are diverse and representative of the population. If the data is skewed towards a particular demographic, the AI will inevitably reflect those biases.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the human choices that are being made in its development. And that brings us to another big question that keeps coming up. What happens to teachers in this future? If AI can personalize lessons, track progress, maybe even provide feedback, does that make human educators obsolete?
That's a question that's generating a lot of anxiety, and understandably so. But I think it's the wrong question to be asking. Instead of asking whether AI will replace teachers, we should be asking how AI can empower teachers to do what they do best.
So you're saying AI could free up teachers from some of the more tedious or time-consuming tasks like grading or lesson planning, allowing them to focus on things that AI can't do, building relationships with students, fostering creativity and critical thinking, and providing individualized mentorship.
Exactly. Imagine a teacher who no longer has to spend hours grading multiple choice tests or creating cookie-cutter lesson plans. Instead, they can use that time to work one-on-one with students, providing personalized feedback and guidance. Or they can facilitate group projects where students collaborate to solve real-world problems.
That sounds amazing, but I also have to play devil's advocate for a moment. What about subjects that rely on hands-on experience like music or art or even surgery? Can an AI really teach you how to play the piano or sculpt a statue or perform a heart transplant? There's a tactile human element to those skills that seems difficult to replicate virtually.
You're right, there are some skills that require hands-on learning and direct human interaction. But even in those areas, the Omni Assistant can play a valuable role. Imagine a virtual piano teacher that can analyze your finger placement, provide real-time feedback on your technique, and even adjust the difficulty level as you progress. Or a VR simulation that allows a medical student to practice a surgical procedure in a safe, controlled environment before ever stepping into an operating room. The technology won't replace the need for human guidance and mentorship, but it can make the learning process more efficient, engaging, and accessible.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. We're not talking about AI replacing teachers. We're talking about AI augmenting their abilities, giving them superpowers to be even more effective. It's like giving a chef a set of amazing new tools they still need to have the skill and creativity to use those tools effectively, but the tools allow them to take their cooking to a whole new level. Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits of the Omni Assistant for both students and teachers, but we haven't really addressed the larger question. What are we actually trying to achieve with all this technology? What are the goals of education in a world where information is readily available at our fingertips?
That's a fundamental question, and one that we can't lose sight of as we navigate these technological changes. The sources we've been looking at highlight a few key themes. One is the importance of intrinsic motivation, moving away from learning for grades or tests and towards learning for the sheer joy of it.
Right, we talked about that earlier in the context of immersive learning experiences. But how do we cultivate that kind of intrinsic motivation in a world where there's so much distraction and information overload?
One way is to encourage students to identify and pursue their own passions. The Omni Assistant can play a role here by providing access to a vast array of subjects and connecting students with mentors and communities who share their interests. Imagine a student who's passionate about marine biology. The Omni Assistant could connect them with a virtual aquarium where they can interact with marine biologists, explore underwater environments, and even participate in research projects. That kind of experience can ignite a lifelong love of learning.
So it's about using the technology to personalize the learning experience, making it relevant and engaging for each individual student. But it's not just about individual pursuits, is it? We also need to prepare students to collaborate to work effectively in teams to solve problems together.
Absolutely, and the Omni Assistant can facilitate collaborative learning in ways that were never before possible. Imagine a virtual classroom where students from different parts of the world are working together on a project guided by a network of expert mentors. They can share ideas, brainstorm solutions, and contribute their unique perspectives regardless of their physical location. It's about fostering a sense of community and shared purpose, even in a virtual environment.
I love that idea, a global classroom where students are connected by shared interests and a passion for learning. But, as we're talking about all these amazing possibilities, I keep coming back to the ethical considerations we touched on earlier. Even if we can create these incredible learning experiences, how do we ensure that the technology is being used responsibly? How do we prevent it from exacerbating existing inequalities or creating new ones?
Those are crucial questions, and ones that we need to be asking constantly as we develop and deploy this technology. We've already talked about the importance of data privacy and algorithmic bias, but there are other ethical considerations as well. For example, how do we ensure that all students have equitable access to the Omni Assistant? What about students with disabilities, and how do we prevent the technology from becoming a tool for social isolation or digital addiction?
It feels like we're venturing into uncharted territory, and there are so many potential pitfalls along the way. Are there any examples from history or even from current technology that can offer some guidance as we navigate these complex issues?
There are certainly parallels we can draw. Think about the debates we're already having around social media and its impact on young people. Issues like screen time, cyberbullying, and the spread of misinformation are all relevant to the conversation about the Omni Assistant. We can learn from the mistakes that have been made with social media and try to build in safeguards to prevent those same mistakes from happening with this new technology.
So it's about being proactive, anticipating potential problems, and building in ethical considerations from the very beginning. It's not about blindly embracing the technology, but about shaping it intentionally to serve our values and goals. But how do we actually do that? I mean, this feels like such a huge, complex issue, and it's hard to know where to even begin. Who's responsible for ensuring that the Omni Assistant is developed and used ethically?
It's definitely collective responsibility. We need policymakers to create regulations that protect privacy and promote fairness. We need tech developers to build in ethical safeguards from the ground up. We need educators to use the technology responsibly and to teach students how to be critical consumers of information. And we need parents and communities to be engaged in the conversation, to voice their concerns, and to help shape the future of education.
Okay, so it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the choices we make as individuals and as a society. It's about being mindful, intentional, and collaborative in our approach. We've covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and I feel like my brain is buzzing with new ideas and questions. But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What does all this mean for your learning journey? How can you prepare for this future, even if it still feels a bit like science fiction?
That's a great question. And I think there are a few key takeaways you can start applying right now, regardless of whether the Omni Assistant becomes a reality in 5 years or 20 years. First, cultivate that sense of intrinsic motivation. Explore your passions, embrace curiosity, and view learning as an ongoing adventure rather than just a means to an end. The world is full of fascinating things to discover, so don't be afraid to dive in and explore.
That's great advice, and it makes me think about something else we've been discussing throughout this deep dive, the importance of connection. Even in a world where AI is becoming more sophisticated, human connection is still essential.
Absolutely. Connect with mentors and communities who share your interests. Collaborate on projects that excite you. Don't be afraid to ask questions, seek guidance, and learn from others.
So it's not just about what you learn, it's about who you learn with and from. It's about building relationships, fostering community, and recognizing that we're all on this journey of learning and growth together. This has been an incredible conversation. We've explored the potential benefits and challenges of the Omni Assistant, grappled with complex ethical questions, and even imagined what the future of learning might look like. But before we get too lost in the philosophical weeds, I want to turn it over to you, our expert, for one final provocative thought. Something to leave our listener pondering, something that builds on the source material, but wasn't explicitly mentioned in our discussion so far. What's the big question we haven't asked yet?
It's interesting. We spent a lot of time talking about how the Omni Assistant might change how we learn.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really dug into what it means for the very definition of knowledge.
That's a really intriguing point. One of the sources you sent included a quote by Albert Einstein. "The only thing that you absolutely have to know is the location of the library." I've always loved that quote. But in a world where we're potentially carrying a virtual library in our pockets, thanks to the Omni Assistant, does that idea even still apply?
Right. That's the million-dollar question.
Hmm.
In a future where information is so abundant and easy to access, will the most valuable skill be knowing how to find the right information, knowing how to evaluate whether it's credible, and knowing how to use it to do things in the real world?
So it's not just about having knowledge anymore. It's about knowing how to use it well. It's about being able to cut through all the noise, figure out what's important, and make connections that other people might miss.
Exactly. And that brings up some really interesting questions about what we should be teaching in schools. If just memorizing facts isn't as important anymore, what skills and ways of thinking should we focus on?
I mean, it feels like we're right on the edge of a huge shift, not just in how we learn, but what it even means to be an educated person in the 21st century. This deep dive has been wild. We've gone from picturing futuristic classrooms to talking about these deep philosophical questions about knowledge itself. I don't know about you, but I kind of need to go for a walk and think about all this.
Me too. Sometimes the best way to let new ideas sink in is to get away from the screen and let your mind wander.
Totally agreed. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive, but we really want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Omni Assistant and what it means for the future of learning? What excites you? What worries you? Tell us your ideas, your hopes and fears. We're all figuring this out together. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those big questions.